Welcome to The Plunge, a cryo-EM podcast from Mimi, Mike, and Liz, sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific.
All right, you ready to go get started?
Sure.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so welcome to The Plunge, a podcast where we're interviewing leaders in the cryo-EM field. I'm Mike Fracco.
I'm Liz Kellogg from Cornell.
And I'm Mimi Ho from Columbia.
Good to see you all guys again.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much for being here. So one of the goals of the podcast, as we had envisioned it, was to discuss not only the leaders in the cryo-EM community and their contributions to the field, but also, the diverse career trajectories of, the people in the field. And we want to showcase different career paths, yours being one of them. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got to be in the place that you are, doing the things that you do in terms of your training?
Well, I was trained as a physicist. I went to the undergraduate in the physics, and actually in a major, that is specific major, solid state physics, semiconductor physics.
Wow.
And then after graduation, I went to work for 2 years as a TA on physics, then came back to graduate school. And still, my first actually lab I joined was a X-ray lab, and then working on something called EXAFS, extended absorption edge fine spec. I don't even remember how that. But anyway, the first within the first year of my graduate school, a master's degree graduate school, then that time there was the major discovery in the field in science was the discovery of the so-called quasi-crystal, and that was fascinating me. And I decided to study the quasi-crystal. And then the best way to study quasi-crystal, the method was electron microscopy. So that's why I switched the lab, and then from an X-ray lab to an EM lab, and then started learning microscopy.
And were you using diffraction-based methods at that point?
That was completely diffraction-based. And then, but then after that, I continued on the PhD, also in the physics, Institute of Physics, not biophysics, Institute of Physics, and then continue working on quasi-crystal, and mostly still working on the diffraction base, but also doing some high resolution imaging. And so after my PhD, I went on to do my first postdoc in Norway with John Jonas. He was actually that very famous physicist, microscopist. And then got 2 years training in his lab, continue working on they shift a little bit towards really like electron crystallography, but on the hard material. And then at that time, I really feel like we want to do some quantitative measurement of the electron beam and diffractions. And then at that time, the first CCD camera became available, and that was in Max Planck in Stuttgart. The first one in Europe was in Max Planck in Stuttgart. So I applied to a fellowship to work in Max Planck to using that CCD camera to do the convergent beam electron diffraction, CBED. And did very well. And I was thinking about I should looking for a faculty position. Then the time I realized that the quasi-crystal and the discovery is pure scientific. There's really no real application. So the field for that particular area, or because also at that time was the world changes, because the collapse of the Soviet Union and then also Berlin Wall and then all these changes that the physics in the entire world is like a downsizing. So I literally really couldn't find a job. So I decided to change field again. And then at that time, I was also fascinated by electron crystallography of membrane protein, 2D crystal. And then because when I first, in a meeting, actually saw Binyard presented some results of electron crystallography of membrane protein, I was shocked. I said, biologists also use a Fourier transform. And so that fascinated me. And then I started paying attention to the field. I decided I want to change that. So, but I don't know anyone in the biology field. I started simply just starting to send in the letter and the mail and then to people I think potentially has need people like my skill. And of course, I sent many letters to people. And then 3 months later, I received a letter and from Ken Taylor from Florida State University. And it was an offer letter. And I actually never met the person. I never spoke with him. And I have no idea what he's working on. And in the offer letter, he told that I'm going to work on inside flight muscle. And I had no idea why people care about those things. But anyway, that's how I went to Florida State and then started also getting encountered in the biology and then started learning the biology. And it was a fascinating journey. And then I was in Florida State for 2 years. Then I got an opportunity to work move again from Florida to Japan and then to Kyoto University, work with Yoshinori Fujiyoshi. And in his lab, I got really exposed to the high level of electron crystallography and electron microscopy. Because Yoshi designed this new JOL helium-cooled microscope. And I remember fascinating in his lab that whenever the microscope has an issue, the engineer comes to tear the microscope apart. And Yoshi often was there and showing me which parts he designed and how he designed that part and why he designed it based on what reason. It was a very fascinating experience. But also at that time, I also got a chance, because Yoshi's lab was one of the best places in the world to do electron crystallography. Mm-hmm. I got a chance to meet and work with a lot of people, like including Werner Kubler, Richard Henderson, and Wachu, and also met with Tom Watts. At that time, he was just finished up his PhD and became in the first year of his postdoc. During his PhD, he determined the structure of aquaporin water channel, aquaporin 1. So at that time, he was recruited by Harvard Medical School to come to Harvard Medical School to build up the cryo-EM. And then Tom and I, when we worked together, became friends. And then Tom also then asked me to see if I can join him to Harvard Medical School to build up this cryo-EM facility with him. So eventually I decided to join him, and that was 2 years after in Kyoto. Then I moved again and to Harvard Medical School, and then started working on it. And I became like a kind of a facility manager kind of role, and then running the facility. But that facility is not like an open facility nowadays, but really a facility, EM equipment of Tom Watts' lab. But I also respond for training a lot of new people, but many people in the field now that their faculty at that time was trained by me, and including actually Tamir Gorlin. And then I told him everything about electron diffraction. Of course, now he does this way better than I did. But also that I learned a lot of protein purification biochemistry from Tamir, because we kind of like teaching each other and in that process. So that's how I, then along that way. And then the one thing also related to my career was really that I always had a goal that I want to become independent PI. And so when I joined Tom's lab, and Tom asked me that, what do you want to accomplish, right? That I told him about this. And I said that I would wish that, I'm teaching everyone doing EM, and I would not collect the data for anyone. And then so I can teach them any way that as much as they want to learn. And then, but also I want to have my own independent sort of my own project. Mm-hmm. So Tom actually was very supportive of that. So while I was teaching other people doing EM, I pick up a project which no one wants to work on, and people think it's not possible. That's a receptor transferrin complex, which is so small. And then that protein was purified in Steve Harrison's lab, was sitting in the fridge for several years, and it was very stable. So, but it's so small, and no one think it's possible to do the single particle. So I started working on it, and then we got a structure, and that became the first cell paper from Tom's lab. I was the first author, and that really also boost up my confidence that I want to start my own career. So a few years later, I started looking for faculty position, and then I end up at the UCSF, which is a great place for me, because at that time when I interview in a number of universities, and then I often hear people's comments saying that you are a physicist, but you don't really understand biology, which is true, right? So and then when I was at UCSF, actually when I met that time the chair Peter Water, and then I mentioned to Peter, I said, look, I thought people were going to ask this question anyway. So I mentioned earlier, you say, look, I'm a physicist by training. I don't understand too much of biology. And Peter's response was that, oh, this is fantastic. Then you know things we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great response.
And that's, I thought that's the thing that really attracted me to UCSF. And then, of course, UCSF has great colleagues that really nurtured me. So I established many long-term collaboration with my colleague and friends. These are really not just say one paper, but really long time collaboration with David Julius, with David Agar, with Kita Narika, with Charlie Craig, with Stephen Ishimura. Many of them, I still work with them closely until this day. Right? So that's really a wonderful place to nurturing people like me that actually learned a lot of biology along the way, and then became what I am nowadays.
Yeah.
So in a way that indeed my career trajectory is very unconventional, not the usual way. So, and then from the time I finished my PhD until the time I became a PI and saw my lab, it was 15 years in between. So it's not normal, but that's how I went through.
Yeah.
And
I mean, spanning so many disciplines, right? It takes longer to learn, but you have a unique perspective to contribute.
That's also true. Yeah.
And so, like, getting ready for this interview, I was talking in my lab, and one question that people have is sort of, you wanted to have your own research group, but what helped you keep going throughout all those transitions? Those are changing universities and learning new fields, or what sort of helped you along the way to get through all those steps?
It's interesting. One is that internal design. I had many times that temptations that people wants me to go here and there and give me, offer me job in this one and that one. But I always thinking that if I want to get another opportunity, I often think that this is my goal. If I take this opportunity, will I still able to accomplish this goal? Right? When I think in that question and look at the place, I feel, okay, that may not be the thing. So therefore, I think, okay, I'm not going to take that one. I will stay with this goal. And another thing for me was that I feel like very lucky that my wife was very supportive to me. And I never had the pressure that from my family, my wife, that say, you have to settle down getting a fixed job. And then so we can all settle down, right? My wife always move with me, and anywhere I want to go. And so I feel like this is very, very important. And without that support, I wouldn't be able to do that. So I think that one is my own internal design. I always this is what I want to do. And another is that the support from family. Because many people do have this desire, I don't want it. But then at the end, they bend to the reality. Right? So then the family, or the many reasons, they say, okay, I have to settle down. And then this seems like a goal, unaccomplishable, I will settle down. So for me, I feel like I was lucky in many ways.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I have a similar situation. My husband is so supportive. I feel like that's the reason I get to do what I do today.
I think that's also the thing that you said about kind of keeping your goal in mind and then thinking every time an opportunity came up, is this going to contribute to my goal or not, is really important, especially for trainees to hear, because I think that for them, a lot of times, especially the people who go straight through, who have a very straight conventional path, they just kind of follow the steps, right? And so they go into grad school and their goal is just the end of grad school, to get that PhD, and they're not thinking about what happens after that. And I think that if you can already have in mind what you want to do at the end, that can guide your decisions much better, the way that you did, right?
Yeah, I feel that's the way. I always say, many times I feel like multiple times that people, offer me job different way and opportunities. And when I think about it, I sort of, okay, I couldn't really, if I take that pause, that may make it harder or less possible for me to really accomplish my goal when I stay in this trajectory. Yeah. So that's why I always stayed. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of leads into the next thing we wanted to kind of talk about, because of course, this has guided your decision making, and you've made great decisions, obviously, because since you've gone to UCSF, you've made a lot of, pioneering contributions to Cryo-EM. And I guess if I could share one anecdote, one of my first how do you say, my first exposure to your work was at a Bay Area Cryo-EM meeting. It was basically in 2013. I just joined Evan Nogales' lab, and it was at the Gatan headquarters, I think, right? Yeah. And at that point, I had done a lot of thinking to try to decide what kind of direction I wanted to go in. And I thought membrane proteins were really kind of up and coming quickly because Brian Kobilka had just done the first GPCR structure. So I was like, this is going to become something big. I thought the TRPV1 channels were very interesting, but there had only been fragments of those structures solved. And in my mind, even up until that point, I was like, I don't know if we'll ever get the TRPV1 structure. And then I also remember, it's kind of funny looking back on it, but when I was a postdoc and I just joined Eva's lab, there were no high resolution structures. And then I was also wondering, would I ever get to use my atomic modeling skills? So I was actually worried about that. And then I went to this Bay Area Cryo-EM meeting, and then and Yifan and Mao Fu Liao really presented the TRPV1 structure, and I was like, oh my gosh, not only are we seeing this structure for the first time, we never, I couldn't even imagine what it looked like. And the second thing was that it was near atomic resolution and you could see the atoms, you can model in the atoms. And then at that point I knew, everything was going to change, and I think we were talking about it yesterday, we all kind of knew, it was one of those things where you'll always remember that moment when you heard about it. So,
yeah. I think we all remember exactly where we were and who we were talking to when we first learned about it. It was kind of really a watershed moment in the field. So
did you, so we want to kind of talk first about what we felt when we, heard about this news, but also what was it like? Did you know everything was going to change once you got that structure? And what was it like, determining such an important structure?
Yeah, it's very exciting, and then obviously it was very exciting, and I don't know, honestly, that at that point that I don't know how broad the impact it would be, and that actually never really bothered me. But I think what's really exciting is that, of course, that we achieved atomic resolution, and we were able to get in the structure of some protein which is completely unknown, with unknown structure previously, and it's part of the thing that I feel like myself, I feel like a goal I set that for myself that I feel like we can accomplish it. And conscious or unconscious, I always thought that as a physicist, by training, that I know the capability of electron microscope. I know we can get a high resolution. And I actually don't remember this thing. Many years later, one of the colleagues mentioned to me, said that the reason that, or at least for him, and then at that time that he voted to hire me, was that when they asked me that, during my interview, that what do you think about it? Is it ever possible EM can get an atomic resolution? My answer was, of course. It's far from there, but this is what we're going to work on it. Mm-hmm. And that was impressed him. But I see. That I didn't really remember that kind of my response, but I think back that really that has always been my goal. I always feel like it is possible to get to high resolution.
And just from first principles.
Just from first, yeah. There are many problems we need to solve this problem, that problem, but if it's just first, it's really possible. And this is also kind of predicted by Richard Henderson, right, from his 1994 and then or 95 this review article. Mm-hmm. And by the way, that article was the first biological paper I ever read. It's not exactly biological paper.
Yeah,
it's
not very biological.
But it's a cryo-EM paper I ever read. After the first paper I read, and after I transitioned to the cryo-EM, and Ken wanted me to start in by reading that paper. And so that paper has a very strong influence on me. So so in a way that I feel very excited. It's not that, we accomplished a goal that I've been dreaming about doing it for many, many years, right? So, but it was beyond that when I never thought about it. What's the broader impact? But certainly, the broader impact I wasn't really thought, but certainly that it was very exciting about. I do remember that I was in a meeting in New Orleans, and we had walk, afterwards, like a kind of sightseeing walk in the city with Andreas Lessinger and then also Scott Stack, 3 of us. And then right there, and I got an email from Mao Fu saying that now we're at the 3 angstrom. And I certainly don't want to tell anyone, but I just became very happy. And later, and that's yes, we kind of wondering why you suddenly became so happy. So indeed, it was really, really exciting. Yeah.
I think to sort of jump in on that and thinking about the impact, I remember sitting in meetings, I think it was an NRAM workshop meeting, as we're talking about the possibility of movie data collection for the new DE detectors and Gatan, and just musing in the room, oh, will this help us? Like, maybe. This might be a helpful step. And it was like the uncertainty around that was actually going to be a big jump for our field, that the motion was a huge problem for getting to high resolution. I remember that conversation, us not knowing and just being, we should find out. This will be interesting to know what happens.
Yeah. Right. Definitely.
I had a random question actually, just while we were talking. So you were saying that was the first biological paper or science paper that you ever read. When you were preparing to kind of switch into biology, so switch fields an extra time, is there anything extreme that you did to prepare? So I know that Hong told me before I wrote my first paper, he told me that when he got ready to write his first paper, biological paper, he went and read all of the Nature papers that had ever been published, starting from the very first one. He read them all in preparation for writing his first biological paper. Did you do anything?
I've never
like
done
that?
anything like that.
Oh, no, that was different for me, because I honestly, that when I came to biology, I have no idea what it's about. So the one thing was that, as I mentioned, that I started working on quasi-crystal. And 10 years after I worked on quasi-crystal, then finally people realized that this quasi-crystal is a fascinating object, but has no special property whatsoever. So far, until this day, no one found anything special about it. But the discovery of quasi-crystal won the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 2012. And so I always bothered with something. I say, okay, we study so hard, and then what is the real use of it? What is the impact to the society? And I was bothered by this question a lot. And right at that time, by chance I was in a meeting, in a workshop actually, that all the talks are physicists. The only one which is not physicist is Bin Yap, and from Berkeley. And he talked about this 2D crystal and this thing. So I sort of fascinated, I said, oh, biologist also does this kind of thing. And then I started talking to him, and he painted me a really rosy picture. Right? He said, our goal is to cure the cancer. I thought that's really useful. And that's really, honestly, I always reflected that moment. Years later, I met Bin Yap. I said, you're the one triggered me to think about changing the biology, simply because you painted me such a rosy picture that we can cure the cancer. I said, that's something really useful, because I've been studying with something after 10 years, people have found this thing has no use whatsoever. So right. that was really, for me, the triggering point. Then I never know how to prepare. My preparation for biology was really from not reading a paper, but reading books. And then I read this, try to understand the protein structure, and I try to understand the very basics, because I really don't know anything about biology. And I read the textbook for the undergraduate to understand what's the biology. But of course, technologically, I'm already in a very relatively high level when I try to understand data processing for 2D crystal and I understand the microscopy. So that part, my knowledge is probably higher than on the average in the field, but my biology is way below. I remember that it was once that I presented the first poster from Ken Taylor's lab that are working on this alpha-actinin and the Golden Conference. I met Huilin. Huilin asked me, what is your hypothesis? And I said, what is hypothesis? I have no idea. What is a hypothesis? Is that useful something? So I seriously don't know any of it. So that's how I learned. So it's a very different way, strange way. So that's why I feel like I'm also further that it's not really conventional. That's also why I also learned that to say that my training in physics was very useful, But it's not just say I can use everything, then you apply it directly to biology. I really have to learn biology from scratch and understand the biological problem and the question we want to address. And then the physics training is really just providing some your skill that you how to think about problem. And of course, there's some also practical things that which are related to cryo-EM, to microscopy. So yeah.
That makes sense. Which one do you enjoy more?
Well, I never regret, right? I always think this is fantastic. Right? So,
I guess now you get to combine both, you know, and you get to do both at the same time.
so that's one thing I still feel often related to the new, and I often want to pay attention to the new development in the physics part, of material science part of electron microscopy, and thinking about some of them may be applicable to biological system. Yeah.
So kind of along those veins of developments, I remember when I was a PhD student at UCLA with Hong hosted you for a talk. So you came and gave a talk at UCLA, and as part of your talk, you mentioned how just a week or two before, there were three labs separately published the same structure of the same protein and at the same resolution within days of each other. And you were kind of talking about how just the pace of cryo-EM, of advancement in cryo-EM, just suddenly after the resolution revolution really took off. And it, I think, took a lot of us, including you, by surprise how quickly it was going. And you were saying that, we all were just adjusting to having to work in a field where suddenly it was accelerating and just continually accelerating. So I remember being really struck by that at the time, that even you, like this huge person in the field, was taken aback by that and caught off guard. And so I guess how have you adjusted to that, or have you adjusted to that? And how I feel like, what are things that you feel like helped you in adjusting to the changing pace?
It's a great question. We're still trying to adjust it, put this honestly, right? So put this, it's a no fun to being scooped, right? So for anyone, if you got scooped, it will always feel painful at any level. And but saying that we still think that we have to adjust it. And I think that what happened is that when the time determined structure is so difficult, and many of our focus, particularly for people like us that are working on recovery-related technology, is focused on determining the structure. Mm-hmm. So in a way, many people, including myself at some point, think about structural biology is to determine structure. Mm-hmm. But then, once the structure determination itself became so rapidly, it's not so easy, because the pace, then you really need to think about what's the real goal of the structural biology. Just like, then we soon realized that. So our goal is to understand biology, is to understand the mechanism. And the structural biology is simply a tool to enable us to get there. And so that's what I always think. We should really think about what's the real meaning of structural biology. Right? It's to using structure to understand the biology. If we start thinking in that angle, then for protein, that we think, okay, it's no longer to determine structure. It's really to understand the mechanism. Like for the CHIP-V1, and then from now that until I determine our first structure is almost 10 years now, our lab will still work on CHIP-V1. We still try to answer certain question, biological question, but there are still many questions related to the same protein still unanswered. So that's how we think about it. We try to work on it. And when one feel like solving structure is my major goal, and that goal, then in this kind of really rapid pace, always became very shaky and very fragile, right? So the chance of being scooped by solving the first structure is always high, right? Because if the protein is important, you are focused on it. There are many people focus on it, mm-hmm. and that's a given, right? So it can be always that there's no guarantee that you will be, no matter how hard you work on. There's no guarantee you will be the first one. But if your goal is to answer the question, how this protein works, then even you got scooped, you will think, because you already keep thinking about this question. Even when somebody, on this step you get scooped, you already say, okay, this will just accelerate because you're already thinking beyond solving structure. That will help you to cope with being scooped. Right? So this is how we try to think about it. So, okay, this is the question. And if other people solve structure, this structure answer the question, answer the biological question we are focusing on. If it answers that, then I'll say, what is my next question? And sometimes you say, okay, didn't really answer the question. So there are still things that I need to do. But that structure, already somebody else published it. And if it's very close, then you already know that you're already there. But if you're very far behind, they say, okay, that helped me accelerate my own, right? So in this way, I feel like it's at least how I try to cope with the rapid pace and try to encouraging people in the lab that to think and not only just say really to plan, but really think beyond determine the structure.
Yeah.
And a lot of time you have to start with by determining structure, but really think beyond that. Along the way, think about biology, think about beyond the structure. So that's why I feel like if you think in that way, the structure is not my ultimate goal, then being scooped, besides the painful, you can always think beyond that. Okay, at least this one accelerate how I try to think beyond that.
Those are really wise words.
Yeah.
I
I feel
really
like
it.
that's such a, I feel like it's a healthier way to think of it.
Yeah.
You know, and I definitely also think that like in just listening to you talk about it, it kind of is really encouraging us as structural biologists to be more well-rounded and like more, I don't know, like it forcing us to grow as a field and grow as scientists rather than just being kind of one-dimensional, I guess.
Right. And to be more thoughtful about it, you know, what does a structure really mean in terms of the biology? I really like your answer.
Yeah, that was a really awesome answer.
That was really good.
I really liked it.
I mean, actually, I was, you know, in thinking about competition, you know, I struggle with this too. And sometimes I mean, what I really like to think about a lot is how to maintain a healthy lab culture in the face of competition. And I mean, how have you dealt with that?
Within the lab, we try to avoid any internal competition, right? So therefore, in our lab, that everything everyone works on is completely open, transparent to every other person, right? So in the way that try to creating an environment that people are helping each other, but not competing each other. So within the lab, that is relatively easy to do because that's really on PI's mind, right? If you say, okay, this is how I want my lab built, then you will enforce this way and try to avoiding any internal competition or internal like a secrecy, put this way, right? So that's relatively easy to do. And that's, I think, is a healthy thing to do. And then externally, there's always competition, oftentimes. And then the way I would always try to do is that if there is a potential competition, we can communicate. We can let each other know that maybe if possible, we can coordinate. But my way of thinking about coordination with other people is that we can try to share with people the information. Oh, we also get the same structure. And but we always try to avoid share the data or share the idea because it's not say we want to keep a secret, but rather than we want to make sure that our thinking is our own thinking. It's not influenced by somebody else. So therefore, the story that we build on our data is the way how we think about problem. And then so the other people, and then maybe this come up with the same conclusion, that would be wonderful, but maybe sometimes it's really different because people may look at the data in a very different angle. So in this way, I think we can make friends, but also cooperate this kind of, because in science, everyone put in the efforts. It's not a win and lose, right? But the reality is that when some people get published in Nature and other people publish in a much lower profile journal, the people get to feel like they are loose because the funding, the many things, promotion get related to that. And that I think is unfair. And then therefore, I think that one should really look at say, okay, if these two papers are published within a certain window of time, they should really look at it equal and then or at the same time. And one should not say deserve more credit. And then the other thing is that this is the time. The other thing is really the content. What is the content? Is this work? Often we say, oh, this work actually did a lot more depth than the other paper. Well, no, this is because everyone's thinking is different. So in this way, I feel like at least that the field will eventually say, oh, this work actually presented a more insight into the question than the other one. And also in this way that you gain the credit recognition by the insight you provide into the field. And then in this way, I feel like at least we try to maintain this way. And also by not sharing the idea of sharing the detail of the data, then people avoid this think, oh, the other person took my idea, or people may say you took other people's idea, right? So we can avoid in that one. And then so I feel like it's a healthy environment. Then we can communicate, we can coordinate, and I think nowadays that the general editor are also more accepting to this kind of idea, right? So oftentimes when the two papers are the same topic submitted, they will treat them equally for the decision for the review or not. And then, but of course, the final decision based on the review comments about both papers. We have a situation that we really coordinate with other lab and we co-submit it. We actually a lot of time end up helping each other and during this co-submission. And we also have time that one worked out in the journal and then the other one didn't. And simply because of the content, right? The real content, the detail. So that's separated the two. And then even most often time by review by the same reviewer, then they made a distinction. They say one, oh, is wonderful. The other one has some shortage. Yeah. Right? So that's in this way that I think people still gain the credit. And then so I often feel like, don't worry about it. But of course, it's easy for me as a PI to say, don't worry about it. But on the other hand, I feel like it is important to make sure that, because everyone's paper, even they say differently, they publish on the same thing, their angle is slightly different. And your angle could be picked up by some people who are really interested in this aspect. Right? So you will always gain the recognition. So that's how we try to cope the rapid pace. Yeah. Right? But one thing I think one try to avoid is that the rapid sort of progress will promoting some people to take a shortcut. So that's something we absolutely try to avoid. So if our data did not say that, did not go that fast, we have to, based on our explanation or our interpretation, based on our data, not because of the rapid pace. If our resolution didn't get it, we should either collect new data or we shouldn't make that claim. That's the way we shall try to do it.
Yeah. Wow.
I think that's a really great way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I feel like you took our question about like how to promote good culture just inside our own labs, and you like expanded it out to like how to promote like a good culture in the entire field. I really like that.
I think so. Thanks for sharing that, because I feel like we all learned something here today. Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
So we're all here because we're attending 2 conferences in Portland. I just finished organizing the scientific programming for the conference this year, and I'm really excited because Yifan is going to take over that responsibility for next year. And I think that, for many reasons, you're the right person to lead it. So I just want to kind of close this out by asking you, what are you most excited for in terms of like cryo-EM developments? What are you aiming to highlight for next year's?
Interesting question, because the field is now really not only expanding or progressing very fast, and there's many new frontier, and then there's some area which is, for example, attracting a lot of pharmaceutical companies for the drug development. Another area, for example, is more like to look into the protein dynamics, and that's related to heterogeneity. These are really a lot of this. These are just 2 examples of frontier, and also the instrumentation is also have a lot of progress and advancement in the last few, and very rapidly, and so those also enables the new biology, or enable us to do the new biology, and with all this thing, I think it's certainly this year is a wonderful program. We want to maintain the similar excitement, and then another area which is became more and more apparent to the field is the machine learning, and then this is being brought into the field, and then the more people or more impact of almost every area. So this is another area I think that which is already in this year's program. I think is a wonderful thing that we should maintain, and certainly for the both like in these meetings that we also want facilitating more people from other tradition using other methods to transition into this one, and so one of the development also in the field is making the whole process more pipeline and then more robust, and so that somebody without extensive training will benefit by applied technology. So this is also another area I think we should continue. And basically, I think we really want to continue the success of this year and the past years, and then to so that we move forward. And then, given the time now that cryo-EM attracting so many people's attention, and then still a very attractive topic for the graduate student, for the trainees, and I'm very confident that next year we will still having the similar successful platform for people to come here presenting exciting science and attracting a lot of attendees. So that's my hope. Yeah.
I think you'll do it. Yeah, we can all. Yeah. Thank you so much, Yifan, for joining us today. First, for sharing your trajectory and also for sharing your words of wisdom. I really, really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, thank you guys having me here, and also really enjoyed to talk to you. And I don't know whether my question or answer is that it really representing my own thinking, and really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to The Plunge, a cryo-EM podcast from Mimi, Mike, and Liz, sponsored by Thermo Fisher Scientific.